Right, so I told you about what was going on with Robert E. Lee in the South. Let me fill you in on what's going on in the North. First, let me show you this statue. This is Abner Doubleday, the man who is famous for inventing baseball, who did not, in fact, invent baseball. It's just kind of the way history goes sometimes. But he did have a big involvement in this battle, which we're going to talk about. Of course, he's from New York. He is on the northern side of this thing. Now, prior to this war, prior to this battle, you just had this battle at Chancellorsville, and as I've said, Robert E. Lee has a outstanding victory. Joseph Hooker, a horrible loss, and he's lost a lot of support. Lincoln's not wild about Hooker at this point. However, Lincoln isn't sure what he can do about it. You know, at one point, I think when McClellan was the general, Lincoln's talking to somebody and the guy says, "You got to replace him." And Lincoln says, "Replace him with who?" And the person says, "Replace him with anybody." And Lincoln looks very kind of disappointed at him and he says, yeah, that's the problem. You can replace him with anybody. I have to replace him with somebody. And the problem is, all right, Hooker did lose this battle, but who do you replace him with? Politics is a big part of the issues that go on in the Northern Army, because you've got Democrats and you've got Republicans that are both involved, right? The Democrats are basically not, for the most part, not particularly interested in emancipation, much more willing to just end up cutting some kind of deal with the Confederacy. And then you have people who are what they would say at the time, we would call rabid abolitionists. So when you lose a battle, if people think you're really on the other side of the equation, you get dragged into congressional hearings, and sometimes they think you're purposely losing, all this kind of thing. So it's toxic, which of course losing is toxic, right? When you're losing battles, when you keep having these difficult defeats that as the North has had, you're going to have a lot of people blaming people and people saying, well, you didn't even try to win and all that kind of thing. And a lot of that happens. And you've got a lot of battling going on with Hooker and Halleck. Again, a lot of it's politics, some of it's personality. The breaking point comes when Hooker wants to use people from Harper's Ferry and Halleck just absolutely says no. And he's only doing this because he doesn't like Hooker. He wants Hooker to cut his own throat, which Hooker then proceeds to do. When he doesn't get the permission to use these people, he sends a letter to Halleck saying that he's going to resign his commission. Basically, I'll resign if you don't give me these people. He sends that on to Lincoln, and Lincoln decides, well, that gets rid of this problem. And he just writes back, accept his resignation. And so that's what they do. But again, we've got Lincoln's problem. You can replace him with anybody. I have to replace him with somebody. He's already tried to get Reynolds to take this job. He's floated it out for a couple people. Everyone's telling him no. Again, a lot of that has to do with the political situation. So what he decides to do, the one person he hasn't asked is Gordon Meade. Gordon Meade from Philadelphia. And he decides, he says, you know what? I'm giving it to Meade. Tell him, you know, this time Lincoln's not going to ask. He asked a couple times. That was a mistake. If you ask, people say no. He realizes, you know what? I'm the commander-in-chief. I'm just ordering him, you're going to command this army. And so he gives this person the notification to supply him with it. And this guy goes out on a train. He actually runs into Dan Sickles, who we're going to talk about, doesn't tell him what he's there for. He shows up and he wakes up Gordon Meade. And he says, I have some bad news for you. Meade thinks he's being arrested. Meade says, I have nothing to admonish myself for, words to that effect. But it's kind of amusing to the other individual because, no, I'm not arresting you, I'm making you the commander. Then he starts saying, well, I'm not sure I should accept this. And he says, sorry, that's the other part of this. You're not being asked. you need to do, you have to do this. This is an order. And they go back and forth. He says, well, I'm jumping over other people. And he says, yeah, Lincoln's thought about that. You have to do it. So anyway, they have to go inform the old General Hooker that he's no longer the commanding general. And here's Gordon Meade, who thinks he's just being set up because he's being made the general only a couple days prior to this battle. And boy, I think about this a lot, especially when I teach leadership programs and so forth, that Lincoln would have the guts to make that move. I think that Hooker really felt like he was in a pretty good shape because you didn't know exactly where this battle was going to happen, but you knew this battle was happening. At that point, they know that Lee is moving a great part of his army, and they're sending people out to meet it. So they know within a week or a couple days or whatever, there's going to be this giant battle. And so I think Hooker is going to use that fact and think that nobody's going to go ahead and allow me to resign right before a major battle, but he does. And now it's going to be Gordon Meade's problem. Gordon Meade's going to have to deal with the situation. And in the next part of this program, we're going to discuss the beginning of the battle.